Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My dear brothers, sisters, friends, viewers of Vikra TV, welcome to another edition of Real Talk. I'm your host Iqbal Bana. Glad to have you here and be in part of your life. As I say to you every week, I come into your homes, invading your privacy at this time of the day. I'm sure some people might be busy either with their children or doing the cooking, as most of the housewives, or looking after the families, and some husbands, I hope, will also be doing some of the cooking and helping their wives as well. If not doing the cooking, at least cleaning and tidying up after them once the food has been served and everybody has settled down. Every week I try and bring some interesting programs to you and try and make sure that we talk about relevant subjects that affect our community and others as well. And today I want to make sure that you are aware of an issue. Some people have called it, in fact I've called it a ticking time bomb, because most of our members of the Asian subcontinent like to own their own properties. So everybody virtually has a house bought in the 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever it is, but they have an asset. Now, as I found out with my mum, and I'm sure many others will find out if they've not already found out, that if in the event that that person needs to go into a care home or a care facility because either members of the family cannot look after them or there's no other provision for them, then their assets, including their property, are likely to be taken into account in terms of their care costs. And this is something that many families have found out to their cost. And I saw a small video last week was sent to me about an English family where a husband and wife, elderly, had worked all their life, bought a property, obviously, had two children, a boy and a girl. When they grew up, the boy and the man and the woman had left the family because they got married, they had their own families. The father, the old man, had died leaving the wife, so everything went to the wife. The wife, the mother in this case, then became ill and had to go into the care home. So the local authority, because as assessed that person's wealth, they included the money she had in the bank as well as the house. So what they assessed was that she had enough assets to pay for the care cost. So what the local authority did was they took into consideration, they took hold of the property by saying when she dies, whether she's in the care home for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever length of time, they will take the property and put it up for sale, which they did in this case. And after the sale of the property, whatever is left over is handed to the inheritors, which are the two children, the young man and the young woman. The property was worth about £160,000, and by the time they took the care cost, the young man and the young woman were left with £10,000 each. That shows that there is a real issue that we, particularly within the families of the Asian subcommunity, need to understand and be prepared for that. Now, there are processes that will allow you to mitigate those costs and those charges that people will face. And to talk about that, I have a very dear friend of mine who's not been on my program for quite a while. I've been trying to get her onto my program, but unfortunately she lost her mum earlier this year. May Allah give her the highest place in Jannah, and her family suffer at these very difficult times. But finally, I have managed to bring her onto the program. As soon as you see her, she'll familiar to you. She has been on the program a couple of times, and she has been very helpful providing legal advice to us. So today I'm deeply honored to invite back onto my program Nasreen Kareem from Platinum Partnerships in Bradford. Nasreen, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the program. Long time. My deepest condolences on losing your mum earlier this year. May Allah give her the highest place in Jannah, and you and the family sabr. I know you've gone through some very difficult, challenging times over the last few years. So, I understand why you were not able to come and join me before, but I'm grateful that you're here today. Nasreen, the introduction talks about people's assets. And in the past, we talked about living power of attorneys as well. We might touch on that. But I know you're a lawyer. You've been working in Bradford and surrounding areas for a very long time. Your reputation precedes you as well. Now, this subject, I know in the past we've touched upon it, but it's one of those tough subjects that I think a lot of people are not familiar with, are unaware of, that what is likely to come down the line. Now, we are seeing in our community, unfortunately, that a lot of young people who would like to look after their parents are no longer able to do so. In the old days, the wives who came over from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh were living at home, whereas the husbands went out to work, and therefore they looked after their in-laws. Nowadays, if you want a reasonable living, then both husband and wife, in most cases they're professionals, want to go out to work, and therefore they don't have the capacity to look after their parents. Is that what you're finding as well? But, coming back first, how big is this issue?
Well, it's exactly as you say it is, and what you have to remember is that family dynamics have changed, communities have changed, and where this wasn't an issue 30 years ago, and I've been practicing as a solicitor for 24 years now, right. It's only just recently that this kind of issue is rearing its head more and more and more. Typically because the family dynamics have changed and there isn't anyone at home to look after elderly parents or any sick relatives or anything like that. Whereas traditionally, for generations, that's what's been happening in the Asian community. So you're absolutely right. That is one aspect of it. Kids,
I mean, you looked after your mum for a very long time, didn't you?
Yeah, for 2.5 years.
You took a lot of time off from work in order to look after her. Not everybody can do that. I mean, may Allah give you strength and reward for that as well.
So I had to juggle running my law firm and looking after my mum. It was helped by COVID in respect that I was able to work from home, and working from home became more normal. So as we went into lockdown, my mum started to become poorly in 2020, so it coincided with lockdown. So I was able to work from home, look after my mother. It was very, very difficult trying to juggle the two. And then it got to a situation where I really had to have care at home for my mum. She didn't want to be in hospital. There was no way I was going to ship her off to a care home. So my mum wanted to be at home, and it's my responsibility and my duty really to make sure that my mum's wishes were respected. So we looked into care, because providing care for my mum at home. And honestly, it's not something I've ever had to look into before. It's not something that we as a community talk about. It's not something that we're used to. And then having the shock realization that the cost of care is very, very expensive. Now, for me, I was the only person at home. My brothers had moved away. My younger sister had died. There were 4 of us. My father had died. So there wasn't anybody else. So I had to do it. But having to deal with that situation in itself, when you're looking after somebody who's elderly and poorly as well, in itself is very, very stressful as well.
Oh, definitely, yes.
So I looked into care around 2.5 years ago, and I had COVID, so I wasn't able to go anywhere near my mum. And because I was the only person at home and there was only me and my mum, I had to get care in. And then the cost of care is 18, 19, 20 pounds an hour, depending on where you go, where you live, which parts of the UK you live in. And suddenly I found myself in a position where I'm looking into this, I'm realising that more and more people are going to find themselves in this position. And as you say, the dynamics have changed. There isn't anybody at home now to look after elderly parents as much as they want to. So we have to rely on care. And as a community, you're right, we are absolutely unprepared for this. In the last couple of years, I've had more and more people speak to me wanting powers of attorney, wanting to talk about property issues because of this issue, because we literally are the first generation who are going to go through this. And yes, nobody really knows what to do, where to apply, what it costs, what the financial assessment means to the family. And again, you're absolutely right. If you are paying for care, and if that person has more than £23,250 as an asset in the property, so if their property is worth more than that, they have to pay for their care. So the local authority will make an assessment. It's means tested. If you have a home, if you have capital, you're paying for your care. It's as simple as that.
Can we just repeat that? That's a very important point. If anybody has cash, liquid cash of £23,200 and a property in their name, then they'll be assessed as having enough assets where they then become a charge becomes liable on them.
Yes.
Am I correct, aren't I?
Yes.
Right. Okay, that's good.
So that person is responsible for their own care. So there's no such thing as free care. There's no such thing as, well, the local authority, the government is going to look after you in your elderly years. That's just not the case. Yes, you might be eligible for a pension, but that's where it stops. So it's up to the individual to figure out, and I mean, I'm doing this now, I'm trying to think ahead in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, if anything happens to me, how am I going to pay for my care? And I'm not the only person thinking like this. People in my generation are having these conversations. We are having these conversations between ourselves, saying, okay, we cannot rely on our children, nor would we want to. I've gone through having to look after my mum. Would I expect any of the youngsters to do that for me? I wouldn't. So we have to be responsible for ourselves. We have to think about what we have, how much we can afford, how we're going to do this. Do we have properties? Is that property going to pay for our care? Or is it important for that property to go to our beneficiaries, whoever's going to inherit it in our wills? So these are all the conversations that we need to start having now. And if you can afford care, fantastic. If you can't afford care and you literally just have a property, as most people do, then you've got to think about, well, how is that property going to be protected? Should it be protected? There's another moral argument. You know, why should you get care for free? You should pay for your care rather than thinking about what you leave to your children. So this is another conversation that needs to be had.
And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to discuss this subject today, and that is most parents would love to leave something behind for their children. They worked hard all their life and they want their children to inherit from their hard work. And mostly, in most cases, the one thing that is a definite that they want to leave behind is their property. But in the event, if they end up in a situation that we've described, the chances are that the property may disappear.
Yes.
Right? And that is the main reason why I wanted to touch on this subject with Naseem. We have spoken about it very, very briefly before, but not in real depth. But even if we did, I just wanted to reiterate what we talked about before, because as Naseem says, the dynamics of our communities are changing. People are being forced to leave their local areas to try and find work elsewhere. So the parents might stay behind and the children are going further away, further afield, and therefore that family unit and that structure is no longer there. So yeah, please carry on. I mean, we'll talk about the living power of attorneys as well. But what are the opportunities for any parent who's watching this program? They'll be maybe thinking, right, I've got a property. I've got 2 or 3 children, boys and girls, and I'd like to leave the property to them. But in the event that they end up in a care situation, then the local authority is likely to take, well, not likely, they will take that property into consideration. And it happened with us as well with my mum. My mum was ill, as many of you will know, for a very long time, and she was completely bedridden, and we had to have care workers coming in and care support staff. And then because it was COVID at that time, she could not live in her own property, and it was not fit for purpose, and didn't have the adaptation they required. So they gave us a little bit of time to try and get that property adapted. Unfortunately for us, she passed away before we managed to do that, but we did get a bill for £23,000 for her care. So we've gone through that as well. Now there are other means as well where you can get continuous health care, but that is much more complicated. I'll talk about that later. What are the possible steps people can take to try and mitigate these care charges or the possibility of care charges?
Okay, so number one, if a property is held solely by that individual, the whole of the property is liable to the charge and to be financially tested. If that property is held in 2 names, only 50% of that property is going to be means tested.
Let me ask you a question here. I found that the majority of our people, the property is in the name of the husband, and the traditional sort of method of people when it came from first wave immigrants, even second wave.
Yes.
Is that your experience as well?
It's changing now, but traditionally, yes, most of my clients, including my own father many years ago, the property was purchased by my father. It was in his sole name.
Right.
When he passed away, then obviously it's gone to my mum. But that was quite common 20, 30 years ago. It's not as common now.
Right, okay.
But it is still an issue, because if you're 70, 80, 90 years old, that property is more than likely going to be in the husband's name only. So number one, reduce your share of that property. So it should really be in husband and wife name if
joint
there
names.
are 2 joint names.
That's the first option.
But you can hold property in 2 names, and you can either hold that property on trust as joint tenants, which is typical for a husband and wife. And what joint tenants means is that if one party passes away, that share automatically goes to the surviving spouse.
Right.
Automatically. If that property in two names is held as tenants in common, that means there are two separate, distinct shares.
Right.
And when one party passes away, that share goes to the person they've named in their will.
Right.
It does not automatically go to the surviving spouse.
So if they don't have that joint tenancy in common, then the property will still go to the surviving spouse, properly, as you say. But what was the second part
Tenants
of that?
in common. So
Tenants
there are
in
two
common.
things.
All
Joint
right.
tenants.
Yeah.
So the property is held by two people but held as joint tenants.
Right.
And that share just literally just swaps over to
Transfer
the surviving.
the surviving person.
Tenants in common,
Yeah.
you have two shares. It doesn't go there. It
Right.
goes there.
All right.
So it's whoever's named in the will, and that's tenants in common.
Right.
So you can still own the property in two names, but it's as on trust as tenants in common,
Right.
and it goes to the person named in the will.
All right.
So, for example, Mr. X has a property with his wife. He has. We'll talk about the situation you had earlier on that you mentioned, and there are two children. When father passed away, that share of that property would have gone to the two children automatically, as long as they were named in the will and there was a will.
Right. So the making of the will is equally as important.
Equally important.
Right. I was going to come to you later on.
Equally important, because
Right.
under intestacy laws, there's no point in not having a will if on death it's going to pass to the surviving spouse anyway. So
Right.
you must have a will. But that's one way of protecting that asset. And then if mum becomes ill, like in the example you gave before, then her 50% share or 30% or 20%, however you want to hold it, because you can change percentages as well, then that's the aspect that's going to be means tested.
Right. Okay. I mean, obviously, there's also this joint tenancy, as you say, and tenancy in common, which I wasn't aware of. You know, well, I was aware of, but it wasn't as clear. We're going to go for a short break. I hope you found so far the subject we're talking about interesting. If you want to call and give us your thoughts, and if you've gone through this process, 01274 214 299. As I say, go and enjoy your cup of tea, coffee, faluda, whatever it is that you enjoy. And I'll see you soon, inshallah. Take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.